Danny Thompson loved the feeling of power between his legs. His black Harley-Davidson motorcycle was his pride and joy. He had worked extra shifts at the construction site for 2 whole years just to buy this beautiful machine. Every time he sat on that leather seat and grabbed those chrome handlebars, he felt like the king of the road. It was a quiet Tuesday evening in late spring. The sun was starting to set and painted the sky with soft orange and pink colors. Danny had just finished his work shift and was riding through the peaceful neighborhoods of Maplewood. His work boots were still dusty from the construction site, and his yellow hard hat was hanging from the back of his bike. Danny was 28 years old and had always been the type of person who loved attention. Even as a kid in school, he would do crazy things just to make other students look at him. Now that he had this powerful motorcycle, he felt like he could impress everyone in town. The quiet suburban streets were perfect for his evening rides. Neat houses lined both sides of the road, each with well-kept gardens and white picket fences. Children often played in their front yards while their parents watched from porches. Dogs walked peacefully with their owners on the sidewalks. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happened. Danny turned onto Maple Street, one of his favorite roads to ride on. The street was wide and straight, perfect for showing off his bike skills. His music was playing loudly from the speakers he had installed on his motorcycle. The heavy metal music echoed between the houses, making windows rattle as he passed by. As Danny rode down Maple Street, he noticed a group of children playing in a front yard. There were about 5 kids, probably around 8 or 9 years old. They were throwing a football back and forth while their parents sat on the front porch talking and drinking coffee. When the children heard Danny's loud motorcycle approaching, they all turned to look. This was exactly what Danny had been hoping for. He loved it when people stopped what they were doing to watch him ride. It made him feel important and cool. Danny decided this was the perfect moment to show off one of his favorite tricks. He slowed down his motorcycle a little bit and then suddenly twisted the throttle hard. The engine roared like an angry lion. The front wheel of his Harley-Davidson lifted off the ground as he performed a wheelie right in front of the house where the children were playing. The kids dropped their football and started pointing at Danny with excitement. Their parents looked up from their conversation with surprise and concern. Some neighbors came out of their houses to see what was making all the noise. Danny felt a rush of pride as he balanced his heavy motorcycle on just the back wheel. But Danny was so focused on impressing his audience that he forgot to pay attention to where he was going. Performing a wheelie requires perfect balance and control. As his front wheel came back down to the ground, the motorcycle landed harder than he expected. The impact made the bike wobble and swerve toward the right side of the road. Danny tried to straighten his motorcycle, but he was going too fast, and the bike was too heavy. His heart started beating faster as he realized he was losing control. The handlebars shook in his hands as the motorcycle headed straight toward the sidewalk. On that sidewalk, an elderly Chinese woman named Mrs. Chen was taking her evening walk with her golden retriever. Mrs. Chen was 70 years old and had been living in this neighborhood for over 20 years. Every day at the same time, she would walk her beloved dog Buddy around the block. It was their favorite time of day together. Buddy was a beautiful golden retriever with soft fur that shined like gold in the evening sunlight. He was 8 years old and had been Mrs. Chen's faithful companion ever since her husband had passed away. The dog was gentle and friendly, always wagging his tail when children wanted to pet him. Mrs. Chen and Buddy were walking slowly along the sidewalk, enjoying the peaceful evening. Mrs. Chen was wearing her favorite blue sweater and comfortable walking shoes. Buddy was sniffing at interesting smells along the way, his tail wagging happily. Neither Mrs. Chen nor Buddy saw Danny's motorcycle coming toward them. They had no idea that in just a few seconds, their quiet evening walk would turn into a nightmare that would change their lives forever. Danny pulled hard on his handlebars, trying desperately to steer his motorcycle back onto the road. But it was too late. The heavy bike was moving too fast and heading directly toward the innocent dog and his elderly owner. The crash happened in slow motion. Danny's heavy motorcycle hit Buddy's back leg with a sickening thud. The beautiful golden retriever let out a heartbreaking cry of pain as he was thrown across the sidewalk. His golden fur became dirty as he rolled on the concrete. Mrs. Chen screamed in horror as she watched her beloved companion get hurt. Danny felt his motorcycle shake as it made contact with the dog. The impact was not enough to knock him off his bike, but it was enough to send Buddy tumbling away from his owner. Danny managed to keep his balance and brought his motorcycle to a stop about 20 feet away from where the accident happened. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking as he held onto the handlebars. Danny turned around to see what had happened behind him. What he saw made his stomach feel sick. Buddy was lying on the sidewalk, whimpering in pain. The dog was trying to stand up, but his back leg would not support his weight. Every time Buddy tried to get up, he would fall back down and cry out in pain. His beautiful golden fur was now covered with dirt and small cuts from rolling on the rough concrete. Mrs. Chen had dropped her walking stick and was kneeling beside her injured dog. Tears were streaming down her wrinkled face as she gently touched Buddy's head. She was speaking to him in soft, comforting words, trying to calm him down. But her voice was shaking with fear and sadness. The children who had been playing in the yard ran over to see what had happened. Their parents quickly followed, looking shocked and concerned. Other neighbors began coming out of their houses when they heard Mrs. Chen crying and Buddy whimpering. Soon there was a small crowd gathering around the accident scene. Danny sat on his motorcycle, frozen with fear and confusion. Part of him wanted to get off his bike and help the injured dog. He could see how much pain Buddy was in, and he could hear Mrs. Chen sobbing. Her cries of sadness cut through his heart like a knife. For a moment, Danny thought about doing the right thing. He imagined himself walking over to Mrs. Chen and apologizing for what had happened. He pictured himself offering to take Buddy to the veterinarian and paying for all the medical bills. He knew this was what a good person would do. But then Danny's fear took control of his mind. He started thinking about all the trouble he would be in if he admitted to causing the accident. He remembered that his boss at the construction company had already warned him 3 times about his bad behavior at work. If Danny got arrested or had to go to court, he would probably lose his job. Danny also thought about how much money it would cost to pay for Buddy's medical treatment. Veterinarian bills could be very expensive, especially if the dog needed surgery. Danny had spent most of his savings buying his motorcycle, and he barely had enough money to pay his rent each month. As these worried thoughts filled his head, Danny noticed that several people in the crowd were taking out their cell phones. Some of them were probably calling for help, but others might be taking pictures or videos of him. Danny panicked when he realized that there was evidence of what he had done. One of the parents from the yard was already walking toward Danny with an angry expression on his face. The man was pointing at Danny and saying something, but Danny could not hear the words over the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Danny made the worst decision of his entire life. Instead of staying to help Buddy and Mrs. Chen, he decided to run away. He twisted the throttle on his motorcycle, and the engine roared back to life. The crowd of people scattered as Danny sped past them, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust smoke. Mrs. Chen looked up through her tears and watched the motorcycle disappear down the street. She could not believe that someone would hurt her dog and then just drive away without even saying sorry. Buddy whimpered again, and Mrs. Chen turned her attention back to comforting her injured friend. The neighbors gathered closer around Mrs. Chen and Buddy, offering to help in any way they could. Someone had already called the emergency veterinarian, and another person brought a soft blanket to keep Buddy warm. But no one had been able to get Danny's license plate number clearly. Danny kept driving fast until he was several blocks away from Maple Street. Only then did he slow down and realize what he had done. He had left an innocent dog suffering on the sidewalk, and he had broken an old woman's heart. But instead of turning around to make things right, Danny kept driving toward his favorite bar, trying to forget about the terrible thing he had just done. Across the street from where the accident happened, a famous man had been watching everything. Jason Statham was standing in the driveway of his friend Mike Rodriguez's house. Mike was a stunt coordinator who worked on action movies, and Jason had come to visit him to talk about some dangerous motorcycle scenes they were planning for his next film. Jason and Mike had been looking at Mike's collection of motorcycles in the garage when they heard the loud roar of Danny's Harley-Davidson coming down Maple Street. Both men were experts when it came to motorcycles and dangerous riding, so they naturally looked up to see what was making all the noise. Jason was wearing a black leather jacket and dark jeans. His famous bald head reflected the evening sunlight as he stepped out of the garage to get a better view. Mike followed behind him, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. They both loved motorcycles and were curious to see what kind of bike was making such a loud sound. When Danny started performing his wheelie in front of the children's house, Jason shook his head with disapproval. As someone who had done countless motorcycle stunts in movies, Jason knew how dangerous it was to show off like that on a public street. Movie stunts were carefully planned with safety equipment and professional riders, but what Danny was doing was just reckless and stupid. Mike pointed at Danny's motorcycle and said to Jason that the rider was going too fast and was not in control. Jason nodded in agreement. He had seen many motorcycle accidents during his years of making action movies, and he could tell that Danny was about to crash. Jason and Mike watched in horror as Danny's motorcycle swerved toward the sidewalk where Mrs. Chen and Buddy were walking. When the bike hit the innocent dog, Jason felt his hands clench into fists. The sound of Buddy's painful cry made Jason's jaw tighten with anger. But what happened next made Jason's blood boil with rage. He watched as Danny sat on his motorcycle for several long seconds, looking at the injured dog and the crying old woman. Jason expected Danny to get off his bike and run over to help. That would be what any decent human being would do. Instead, Jason saw Danny look around nervously at the gathering crowd. He saw Danny notice the people taking out their phones. And then Jason watched in complete disbelief as Danny started his motorcycle engine and sped away from the scene, leaving behind the injured dog and heartbroken old woman. Jason had played tough guys in movies who fought against criminals and bullies. He had pretended to be heroes who always did the right thing and protected innocent people. But this was not a movie. This was real life, and Jason had just witnessed a real act of cowardice and cruelty. Jason loved animals and had always owned dogs throughout his life. When he was a child, his family had a golden retriever very similar to Buddy. Seeing an innocent dog get hurt and then abandoned made Jason feel a deep anger that he rarely experienced. Mike could see the fury building in Jason's eyes. He had worked with Jason on many movies and knew that behind the tough guy image was a man with a strong sense of right and wrong. Mike watched as Jason's face grew darker with each passing second. Without saying a word to Mike, Jason walked quickly to his black Range Rover that was parked in Mike's driveway. The expensive vehicle was one of Jason's favorite cars because it was fast and powerful, perfect for both city driving and off-road adventures. Jason climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Mike ran over to the passenger side window and asked Jason where he was going. Jason looked at his friend with determined eyes and said that he was going to follow the coward who had hurt that innocent dog. Mike tried to tell Jason to let the police handle it, but Jason was already backing out of the driveway. He had gotten a good look at Danny's motorcycle and had even managed to see part of the license plate number. Jason was not the type of man who could just stand by and watch police get away with hurting innocent victims. As Jason drove out of Mike's driveway and onto Maple Street, he could see Danny's motorcycle in the distance. The coward was probably thinking that he had escaped and that no one would ever find him. But Danny had no idea that one of Hollywood's toughest action heroes was now following him, and Jason was not going to let this hit-and-run driver disappear into the night. Jason kept his Range Rover at a safe distance behind Danny's motorcycle. He had learned how to follow targets without being noticed from all the action movies he had made over the years. The key was to stay far enough behind so the person being followed would not get suspicious, but close enough to see where they were going. Danny was completely unaware that anyone was following him. He was too busy feeling proud of himself for escaping from the accident scene. In his twisted mind, Danny thought he had been very clever to get away before the police arrived. He had no idea that a famous action hero was tracking his every move. Jason watched as Danny rode through several different neighborhoods. The motorcycle turned left onto Oak Street, then right onto Pine Avenue, and then left again onto Elm Road. Jason carefully memorized each turn and each street name. His sharp eyes also noted the time on his dashboard and the direction they were traveling. During his movie career, Jason had worked with many professional drivers and police consultants. They had taught him how to follow someone properly and how to gather evidence. Jason was now using all of these skills in real life to track down the coward who had hurt an innocent dog. As they drove through the town, Jason kept thinking about what he had witnessed back on Maple Street. He could not get the image out of his mind of Buddy lying on the sidewalk, whimpering in pain. He also kept thinking about the tears on Mrs. Chen's face as she knelt beside her injured pet. Jason had always believed that people should take responsibility for their actions. In his movies, the good guys always faced the consequences of their choices, whether good or bad. But in this real-life situation, a selfish bully was trying to run away from what he had done. The chase continued for about 15 minutes as they moved through different parts of town. Jason noticed that Danny seemed to be heading toward the older section of the city, where there were more bars and nightclubs. This made sense to Jason because cowards often went to places where they could drink alcohol and try to forget about their problems. Danny's motorcycle finally slowed down as they approached a rundown area with several old buildings. Jason could see neon signs advertising cheap beer and pool tables. This was clearly not the nicest part of town, and Jason figured it was probably where Danny felt most comfortable. The motorcycle pulled into the parking lot of a place called Murphy's Bar. The building looked old and dirty, with paint peeling off the walls and several broken windows that had been covered with cardboard. There were about a dozen other motorcycles and old cars parked outside, suggesting that this was a popular hangout spot for people like Danny. Jason parked his Range Rover across the street where he could watch the bar entrance, but where his expensive vehicle would not be too obvious. He turned off his engine and sat quietly, planning his next move. Through the dirty windows of Murphy's Bar, Jason could see Danny walking inside. The coward was already laughing and talking with some friends, probably bragging about his motorcycle ride. Danny seemed to have completely forgotten about the innocent dog he had injured just 30 minutes earlier. Jason sat in his car for several minutes, thinking carefully about what he should do next. He could call the police and report the hit-and-run accident, but he had not gotten a clear view of Danny's license plate number. Without solid evidence, it would be difficult for the police to prove that Danny was responsible for hurting Buddy. Jason also thought about just walking into the bar and confronting Danny directly, but he knew that his fame might complicate the situation. If people recognized him, they might think this was some kind of publicity stunt for a movie. After considering all his options, Jason decided that the best approach would be direct and honest. He would walk into Murphy's Bar, confront Danny about what he had done, and give him a chance to do the right thing. If Danny refused to take responsibility, then Jason would make sure the whole world knew what kind of coward this man really was. Jason took a deep breath and stepped out of his Range Rover. The evening air was getting cooler, and he could hear loud music and laughter coming from inside Murphy's Bar. He walked across the street with confident steps, his leather jacket making soft creaking sounds as he moved. When Jason pushed open the heavy wooden door of the bar, the strong smell of beer and cigarette smoke hit him immediately. The inside of Murphy's Bar was even more run down than it looked from outside. The floor was sticky, the lighting was dim, and most of the furniture looked like it had not been replaced in 20 years. There were about 30 people inside the bar, mostly men in their 20s and 30s who looked like construction workers or mechanics. They were drinking beer, playing pool, and watching a sports game on several old television sets mounted on the walls. At first, nobody noticed Jason walking in. But as he moved further into the bar, conversations began to slow down. One by one, people started to recognize the famous action movie star. Whispers spread throughout the room as customers nudged their friends and pointed at Jason. Danny was standing at the pool table in the back corner of the bar, holding a pool stick and laughing loudly with 3 of his friends. He was in the middle of telling them about his motorcycle ride earlier that evening, but he was only talking about the wheelie he had performed. Danny was not mentioning anything about hitting a dog or running away from an accident. Jason walked directly toward the pool table where Danny was standing. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and the entire bar gradually became quiet as everyone realized something important was about to happen. Danny was lining up a shot when he noticed that his friends had stopped talking and were staring at something behind him. He turned around to see what they were looking at, and his face went completely white when he saw Jason Statham standing just a few feet away. For a moment, Danny thought he might be seeing things. He blinked several times and shook his head, but Jason was still there, looking directly at him with intense eyes. Danny's hands started shaking, and he nearly dropped his pool stick. Jason's voice was calm but carried a tone of controlled anger that made everyone in the bar pay attention. He spoke clearly so that everyone could hear what he was saying. Jason told Danny that he had witnessed what happened on Maple Street 30 minutes earlier. He described in perfect detail how Danny had been showing off on his motorcycle, how he had lost control and hit an innocent dog, and how he had then driven away without helping the injured animal or its elderly owner. Danny's mouth fell open in shock. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His friends took several steps back from the pool table, not wanting to be associated with what Danny had done. Jason continued talking, explaining that he had followed Danny to this bar, and that he was disappointed to see a grown man act like such a coward. He described how the golden retriever named Buddy was lying on the sidewalk in pain, and how Mrs. Chen was crying over her injured pet. Some of the people in the bar started taking out their cell phones to record what was happening. They realized they were witnessing something incredible, and they wanted to capture it on video. Danny finally found his voice and tried to deny everything. He claimed that Jason must be confused and that he had not hit any dog. He said he had just been riding through the neighborhood and had not stopped anywhere. But Jason was prepared for Danny's lies. He recited Danny's license plate number, which he had memorized during the chase. He described the exact time of the accident and gave a detailed description of Danny's motorcycle. He also mentioned the specific street name and the house where the children had been playing. Danny's friends looked at him with disgust as they realized their buddy was lying to them. They had known Danny for several years, and they were aware that he sometimes acted selfishly, but they had never thought he would hurt an innocent animal and then lie about it. The entire bar was now completely silent except for Jason's voice. He explained to Danny that he had 2 choices. Danny could either go back to Maple Street immediately and take responsibility for what he had done, or Jason would make sure that the police and the news media heard about this hit-and-run accident. Jason made it clear that he was not going to let Danny get away with hurting Buddy and breaking Mrs. Chen's heart. He said that cowards who hurt innocent animals and then run away needed to face the consequences of their actions. Danny looked around the bar at all the faces staring at him. He could see disappointment and anger in their eyes. Even his closest friends were shaking their heads in disgust. Danny realized that his reputation was completely ruined, and the only way to salvage anything was to do what Jason was asking him to do. With his head hanging down in shame, Danny finally admitted that Jason was right. He confessed that he had hit the dog and had been too scared to stop and help. He agreed to go back to Maple Street and face Mrs. Chen. Danny walked out of Murphy's bar with his head down, feeling ashamed and embarrassed. Jason followed closely behind him, making sure that the coward would not try to escape again. The other people in the bar watched through the windows as the famous movie star and the motorcycle rider got into their vehicles. Danny's hands were shaking as he started his motorcycle. He had never felt so nervous in his entire life. The thought of facing Mrs. Chen and seeing the injured dog again made his stomach feel sick. But he knew he had no choice now that Jason Statham was involved. The ride back to Maple Street felt much longer than it actually was. Danny drove slowly and carefully, very different from his reckless riding earlier that evening. Jason followed in his Range Rover, keeping a close eye on Danny to make sure he did not change his mind and try to run away again. When they arrived at Maple Street, Danny was surprised to see that there were still several people gathered around Mrs. Chen's house. Neighbors had brought chairs from their homes so that Mrs. Chen could sit comfortably while holding Buddy. Someone had also brought a soft blanket to keep the injured dog warm. A veterinarian had arrived and was examining Buddy carefully. The doctor was a kind woman in her 40s who specialized in emergency animal care. She was gently touching Buddy's injured leg while explaining to Mrs. Chen what needed to be done to help the dog recover. Danny parked his motorcycle at the curb and walked slowly toward the group of people. Jason parked his Range Rover and followed a few steps behind. As they approached, the neighbors recognized Jason and began whispering to each other about why the famous actor was there. Mrs. Chen was sitting in a folding chair, cradling Buddy in her arms. The dog was wrapped in a blue blanket, and his injured leg was supported by a small pillow. Buddy's eyes were droopy from the pain medication the veterinarian had given him, but he was no longer whimpering. When Mrs. Chen saw Danny approaching, her expression changed from sadness to confusion. She did not understand why the man who had hurt her dog was coming back. Some of the neighbors stepped closer to Mrs. Chen, ready to protect her if Danny tried to cause more trouble. Danny stopped about 10 feet away from Mrs. Chen and stood there for several seconds without saying anything. He could see the pain in her eyes and the careful way she was holding Buddy. The sight of the injured dog made Danny feel terrible about what he had done. Jason stepped forward and gently placed his hand on Danny's shoulder. This simple gesture gave Danny the courage he needed to speak. In a quiet voice that was much different from his usual loud bragging, Danny began to apologize. He told Mrs. Chen that he was the person who had hit Buddy with his motorcycle. He admitted that he had been showing off and riding recklessly when he lost control of his bike. Danny said he was sorry for hurting Buddy and for driving away without stopping to help. Mrs. Chen listened to Danny's apology with tears in her eyes. She was quiet for a long time before she finally spoke. In her soft voice with a slight Chinese accent, she told Danny that she was not angry with him for the accident. Accidents happen, and she understood that he had not meant to hurt Buddy on purpose. But Mrs. Chen said she was very disappointed that Danny had driven away without stopping to help. She explained that Buddy was not just her pet, but her closest friend and companion. Ever since her husband had died 2 years earlier, Buddy had been the most important thing in her life. Mrs. Chen told Danny that when she saw him drive away, it broke her heart even more than the accident itself. She could not understand how someone could hurt an innocent animal and then just leave without even saying sorry. The veterinarian looked up from examining Buddy and explained to everyone what was wrong with the dog. She said that Buddy had a broken bone in his back leg and would need surgery to fix it properly. The dog would also need several weeks of rest and special care while the bone healed. The veterinarian explained that the surgery would cost about $3,000 and the follow-up care would cost several $100s more. This was a lot of money for Mrs. Chen, who was living on a small retirement pension from the restaurant where she used to work. Jason stepped forward and quietly suggested to Danny that apologizing was not enough. He pointed out that Mrs. Chen should not have to pay for expensive medical bills because of Danny's reckless behavior. Jason said that taking responsibility meant more than just saying sorry. Danny realized that Jason was right. He reached into his wallet and pulled out all the cash he had with him, which was about $200. He offered the money to Mrs. Chen, but she politely refused to take it. She said the money would not be nearly enough to pay for Buddy's medical care. Danny promised Mrs. Chen that he would pay for all of Buddy's medical bills, even if it took him several months to earn enough money. He gave the veterinarian his phone number and address so that all the bills could be sent directly to him. Jason suggested that Danny should also help Mrs. Chen with other things around her house while Buddy was recovering. Since the dog would not be able to go on their daily walks, Mrs. Chen would need someone to help her with grocery shopping and other errands. The next morning, Danny woke up with a terrible feeling in his stomach. He had barely slept all night because he kept thinking about what had happened to Buddy. For the first time in his life, Danny truly understood how his selfish actions had hurt other people. Danny called his boss at the construction company and asked for extra work shifts. He explained that he needed to earn more money to pay for some important medical bills. His boss was surprised because Danny had never asked for extra work before, but he agreed to give Danny more hours. That afternoon, Danny drove to Mrs. Chen's house in his old pickup truck instead of his motorcycle. He wanted to check on Buddy and see if Mrs. Chen needed help with anything. When he knocked on her front door, Mrs. Chen seemed surprised to see him. Danny explained that he wanted to help take care of Buddy while the dog was recovering from surgery. Mrs. Chen was hesitant at first because she still did not completely trust Danny, but when she saw the sincere concern in his eyes, she decided to give him a chance. Mrs. Chen invited Danny inside her small but neat house. The living room was decorated with photos of her late husband and Buddy. There were also pictures of her family in China, whom she had not seen in many years. Buddy was lying on a soft dog bed in the corner of the living room. His back leg was wrapped in white bandages, and he had to wear a plastic cone around his neck to prevent him from licking his stitches. The dog looked tired and uncomfortable, but his tail wagged slightly when he saw Danny approaching. Danny knelt down beside Buddy's bed and gently petted the dog's head. He whispered an apology to Buddy and promised that he would help take care of him until he was completely healed. Buddy seemed to understand that Danny was trying to help, and he licked Danny's hand with his pink tongue. Mrs. Chen was touched by the gentle way Danny spoke to Buddy. She began to believe that maybe this young man really was sorry for what he had done and wanted to make things right. Over the next few days, Danny visited Mrs. Chen and Buddy every evening after work. He helped Mrs. Chen carry heavy grocery bags from the store. He fixed a broken step on her front porch. He also helped her give Buddy his pain medication and change his bandages. At first, these visits were awkward and uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen was polite but distant, and Danny did not know what to say to her. But gradually, they began to have real conversations. Mrs. Chen told Danny about her life in China before she moved to America. She had been a teacher there and had met her husband when they were both young. They had moved to America 40 years ago to start a new life, and her husband had worked at a factory while she worked at a Chinese restaurant. Danny told Mrs. Chen about his own life and admitted that he had always been selfish and only cared about impressing other people. He said that hurting Buddy had made him realize how wrong his behavior had been. Jason Statham checked on them several times during the first week. He was pleased to see that Danny was keeping his promise to help Mrs. Chen and Buddy. Jason could tell that the experience was changing Danny into a better person. After 2 weeks, Buddy was strong enough to take short walks around the house. Danny would visit every evening and slowly walk with Mrs. Chen and Buddy around the block. The dog still limped on his injured leg, but the veterinarian said he was healing well. During these walks, Mrs. Chen began to share more personal stories with Danny. She told him how lonely she had been since her husband died and how Buddy had become her closest companion. She explained that taking care of the dog gave her a reason to get up every morning and gave structure to her days. Danny realized that Mrs. Chen was just as lonely as he was, but for different reasons. He had always felt lonely because he thought nobody liked him, so he tried to get attention by showing off. Mrs. Chen felt lonely because the person she loved most in the world was gone forever. As the weeks passed, something beautiful began to happen. Mrs. Chen started to think of Danny as the grandson she had never had. Danny started to think of Mrs. Chen as the grandmother he had always wished for. Their friendship grew stronger every day. Danny also began to change in other ways. He stopped riding his motorcycle recklessly through neighborhoods. He started being more polite to his coworkers at the construction site. He even apologized to his boss for his past bad behavior and promised to be a better employee. The medical bills for Buddy's surgery and treatment came to over $4,000. Danny worked overtime every week for 3 months to earn enough money to pay all the bills. It was the first time in his life that he had worked so hard for someone else's benefit. Mrs. Chen was amazed by Danny's dedication to helping her and Buddy. She had never expected the young man who had hurt her dog to become such an important part of her life. She began cooking Chinese dinners for Danny and teaching him how to use chopsticks properly. By the end of the 3rd month, Buddy was completely healed and could run and play just like before the accident. But Danny continued to visit Mrs. Chen every evening, not because he had to, but because he wanted to spend time with his new friend. 3 months after the accident, Danny's life had completely changed. He no longer spent his evenings at Murphy's bar drinking beer and bragging to his friends. Instead, he looked forward to visiting Mrs. Chen and Buddy every day after work. Danny had also made changes to his appearance and behavior. He had traded in his loud Harley-Davidson motorcycle for a quieter Honda bike that did not disturb the neighbors. He wore his helmet properly and always followed traffic rules when he rode through residential areas. At the construction site, Danny's boss and coworkers were amazed by the change in his attitude. He arrived at work on time every day, completed his tasks without complaining, and even volunteered to help other workers when they needed assistance. Danny had become one of the most reliable employees at the company. But the biggest change in Danny's life was his growing friendship with Mrs. Chen. What had started as an obligation to make up for his mistake had become the most meaningful relationship he had ever had. Mrs. Chen had begun teaching Danny how to cook traditional Chinese food. Every evening, they would prepare dinner together in her small kitchen. She taught him how to make dumplings, fried rice, and sweet and sour chicken. Danny was not very good at cooking at first, but Mrs. Chen was patient and encouraging. During these cooking lessons, Mrs. Chen would tell Danny stories about her childhood in China and her early years in America. Danny learned about the challenges she and her husband had faced as immigrants and how hard they had worked to build a life in a new country. Danny also shared more about his own life with Mrs. Chen. He told her about growing up without a father and how his mother had worked 2 jobs to support them. He explained that he had always felt like he needed to prove himself to other people, which was why he had developed such bad habits. Mrs. Chen listened to Danny's stories with understanding and compassion. She told him that everyone makes mistakes when they are young, but what matters is learning from those mistakes and becoming a better person. Buddy had also become very attached to Danny. The golden retriever would run to the door with excitement whenever Danny arrived for his daily visit. Buddy's leg had healed completely, and he showed no signs of fear or anger toward the man who had accidentally hurt him. Danny began taking Buddy for longer walks around the neighborhood. Sometimes they would go to the park where Buddy could run freely and play with other dogs. Danny enjoyed watching Buddy chase tennis balls and swim in the small pond at the center of the park. One evening, while they were preparing dinner together, Mrs. Chen told Danny that she considered him to be part of her family now. She said that having him in her life had helped her feel less lonely and had given her something to look forward to every day. Danny was so moved by Mrs. Chen's words that he had tears in his eyes. He told her that she had taught him what it meant to truly care about another person. He said that before meeting her, he had only cared about himself and what other people thought of him. Jason Statham had been checking on them regularly during the past 3 months. He was impressed by the genuine friendship that had developed between Danny and Mrs. Chen. Jason could see that his intervention had led to something much more positive than just punishment for Danny's bad behavior. One Saturday afternoon, Jason invited Danny and Mrs. Chen to visit the movie set where he was filming his latest action movie. Mrs. Chen had never been on a movie set before, and she was excited to see how movies were made. Danny was amazed to see all the cameras, lights, and equipment that were used to create the exciting scenes he loved watching in theaters. Jason introduced them to the other actors and crew members, and everyone was impressed by the story of how Danny and Mrs. Chen had become friends. During a break in filming, Jason told Danny that he was proud of how much he had changed over the past few months. He said that it takes real courage to admit when you are wrong and to work hard to make things right. Jason also told Mrs. Chen that he admired her kindness and forgiveness. He said that not everyone would have given Danny a second chance after what he had done, but her compassion had helped transform a selfish young man into someone who cared about others. 6 months after the accident that changed everything, Danny Thompson was a completely different person. He woke up every morning with a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. His days were filled with meaningful work, genuine friendships, and activities that helped other people and animals. Danny and Mrs. Chen had become regular volunteers at the Maplewood Animal Shelter. Every Saturday morning, they would arrive early to help feed the rescued dogs and cats. Danny had become especially good at working with dogs who had been injured in accidents, just like Buddy had been. The shelter workers were amazed by Danny's patience and gentleness with the traumatized animals. Many of the dogs were afraid of people when they first arrived at the shelter, but Danny had a special way of earning their trust. He would sit quietly with them for hours, speaking in soft tones and offering treats until they felt safe enough to approach him. Mrs. Chen worked mostly with the older animals who had been abandoned by their families. She understood what it felt like to be lonely, so she spent extra time giving attention to the dogs and cats that other volunteers sometimes overlooked. Her gentle touch and soothing voice helped many animals feel loved again. Danny's friendship with Mrs. Chen had grown even stronger over the months. They had dinner together almost every evening, and Danny had learned to cook several Chinese dishes perfectly. Mrs. Chen had also learned to enjoy some American foods that Danny introduced to her. Buddy had become like a bridge between their two different worlds. The golden retriever was completely healthy now and showed no signs of his previous injury. He seemed to understand that he had played an important role in bringing Danny and Mrs. Chen together, and he enjoyed being the center of attention in their little family. Danny's coworkers at the construction site barely recognized the man he had become. His supervisor had promoted him to team leader because of his improved attitude and work ethic. Danny now helped train new employees and made sure that safety rules were always followed on job sites. Most importantly, Danny had learned to find satisfaction in helping others rather than in showing off for attention. He no longer felt the need to impress people with dangerous motorcycle tricks or loud bragging. Instead, he felt proud when he helped an injured animal learn to trust humans again, or when he fixed something around Mrs. Chen's house that made her life easier. One evening in late autumn, Jason Statham came to visit Danny and Mrs. Chen at her house. He brought exciting news with him. Jason's latest movie was going to have its premiere at the local theater, and he wanted to invite them as his special guests. Jason explained that he had told the movie's producers about Danny's incredible transformation after the accident. The producers were so impressed by the story that they wanted to make a short documentary about second chances and the power of forgiveness. They hoped that Danny and Mrs. Chen's story might inspire other people to take responsibility for their mistakes and help their communities. Mrs. Chen was nervous about being in a documentary, but Danny encouraged her by saying that their story might help other people learn from his mistakes. She agreed to participate because she believed that sharing their experience could prevent other accidents and encourage more people to volunteer at animal shelters. The night of the movie premiere was like a fairy tale for Mrs. Chen. She wore her best dress and felt like a celebrity as photographers took pictures of her walking down the red carpet with Danny and Jason. She had never imagined that helping one young man change his life would lead to such an amazing experience.